Hello YouTube viewer, thanks for watching. My name's Hashim, and if you're familiar with the channel, you know that I've done a review on this product called the Essential Film Holder, and that it's also what I currently use for all of my home film digitization. If you're unfamiliar and you want to check that video out, I'll put a card for it here, but if you are, you probably also know that I recently got my hands on this product called the Valoi 360. So if you saw my live stream talking about how I received one of these, a beta version of this, for review, I decided to do a comparison between the Valoi 360 and the Essential Film Holder through some testing and usage and examples that I'm going to talk about in this video. So if you already know the backstory and you just want to skip ahead to a certain section, like let's say the scan comparison or my conclusions, you can just use the chapter markers to skip ahead to wherever you like. Otherwise, the backstory of this product is that it was launched as a Kickstarter product. It's coming out mid this year, I believe. And the main difference, if it's not obvious, is that the Valoi has this advancing system with these wheels rather than the Essential Film Holder where you would just have to use your hands to feed it through, and it has this guide layer. And Harold from Valoi reached out at one point and said he had an extra beta unit to send me, but that is a disclaimer worth making to you guys, is that this is a beta unit. The advanced system should be the exact same as far as I know in the final product, but in the beta version, these masks had a little bit of an issue apparently with the injection molding, which is what how they're made, and that there was some issue where they had to have these remade in order to improve the flatness and the final product. Otherwise, they are very different price points. That's one of the main differences. So this product, it comes from the UK and it's priced between 70 and 90 pounds, depending on the version you want, whether it's the 35mm mask only or the 35mm plus 120. So the full kit would be 90 pounds, including worldwide shipping. With the Valoi, it really depends again on how much of the kit you buy, because you can just buy the masks for, I think, around 20 euros each. The Advancer is the main thing, I think, that would attract most people to getting this system, and what I feel like most people will end up buying. So to buy the Advancer with at least one of these masks, you're looking at about, let me check my notes here. So it's in euros, they sell it in euros, and it's about maybe between 200 and 300 really, depending on how many of the accessories you get. You could probably go over 300 euros, but just to put that into a practical sense, at least for me here in Australia, this is about 160 Australian dollars, whereas this is going to be around 400 Australian dollars or more, depending, especially if you're going to buy the diffuser for this, which already comes included with the EFH. So that's including shipping. Because the Valoi is 20 euro shipping, I factored that in, and I definitely recommend using a diffuser, a good diffuser, unless your light is perfectly diffused, maybe like those Kaiser Slimlite Planos or whatever they're called. I think they have a pretty well diffused light, but otherwise you want to make sure your light is well diffused. All right, so a big difference in price point. Now, the other main attraction for me in terms of usage, so let's talk a little bit about usage and mainly focusing on 35mm, is that when it comes to using this, you're just feeding the film through by hand. But what attracted me to this whole idea, and I was quite interested in this when it launched on Kickstarter, was that it had a similar advancing system to what I saw from Negative Supply, which was always, it seemed really cool, just having wheels to advance your film, and that would add convenience is what I thought. It would save some time. In practice, after actually using this for a while and having that advancing system, it is pretty convenient, it is cool, but I didn't actually find that it saved me too much time. So maybe if you go through a lot of film, you scan a lot of volume of 35mm film, especially long uncut rolls, it might save you a bit of time. However, what I found is that by the time you feed the film through this little mask, and then you need to feed it into the wheels, make sure it catches, and then advance it, meaning you have to turn the knob a few times to advance each frame, and then also make sure you haven't turned it too many times and align each frame. You're not saving too much time in practice. I was pretty excited to think that I would, but then in reality I found that it was nice to have, but it didn't actually add too much convenience, because with the Essential Film Holder, you're just sort of sliding the film through, and with this, you're turning the knob a few times, which you still have to go back, take the photo. So I can imagine that it might save you a bit of time if you're going through a lot of volume. The Valoi has what's called this S-track curve, which feeds the film in a way to try and hold it as flat as possible within this aperture area. It tries not to make any contact with the frame part of the film. It only touches the edges, is what I'm trying to say. And same with the wheels there, is that they grab the film by the edges and feed it through. But what I found again is that it's definitely worth having a diffuser. And in order to show you my reasoning behind saying that, let's jump into Lightroom and look at some scans. All right, so I've got a frame here that I scanned with the Valoi film holder, and you can see that because of the way I scanned it, using just the pure Valoi without any diffuser, just the way it was sent to me, using my preferred light source that I use with the EFH, it's not perfectly diffused. So what you'll find is that there's little hot spots all over the scan. And I had some other examples where there were hot spots on either just one side or the other, with the lighting not being even. So not only is it important for the light to be very well diffused, but also for that diffuser to not add any color casts and not create any hot spots. And here we have the Essential Film Holder scan in comparison, and just putting them both side by side and ignoring the difference obviously caused by the diffuser. You can see one of the main other differences is that with the EFH, you get a little bit more of that black border, and with the Valoi, a little bit less of that black border, if that matters to you. Otherwise, let's look at some other scan comparisons. Here I have a frame that was scanned on the EFH on the left, and on the right was through the Valoi, but with my old light source that I used to use. Even it's perfectly diffused, but it doesn't have a great CRI. So what I found is that it was harder to get good colors, but you can already see the big improvement by using a diffused light source. And otherwise, what I really wanted to do is make this comparison as fair as possible. So I kind of cheated and took the diffuser off of the EFH and used that with the Valoi so that the light source could be the same light source. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be as easy of a test to do. And I found that this diffuser works really well. And actually fits perfectly under the Valoi. So I used that for all future examples I'm going to show you. I know this may not be practical for you, but just for the purpose of testing so we can focus on everything else, I used the EFH diffuser to do my Valoi scan. So let's look at another frame here. Valoi scan on the right, again, you can see a little bit less of that border on the bottom and the sort of the rough edge. In terms of sharpness and flatness, it's about the same. No noticeable difference between the two that I could see. There's a bit of a difference in color due to Negative Lab Pro converting it slightly differently each time. But if we zoom into the corners of the frame here, you can't really see any worthwhile difference looking at, for example, this bottle here or the sidewalk. Again, there's a little bit more blue in the Valoi scan. But in terms of flatness, they both do a good job. The Valoi has that S-track curve. I don't know how much more flatness it can add once you've stopped your aperture down, but they're both great in that regards. So let's move on to the next section. And that is to talk about the 120 usage. So this was quite different, I found, compared to using the 35mm holder. Now, due to the fact that 120s are not a very long piece of film, it doesn't take that long to advance, by hand. So having the roller system means that at first I thought it would be quite easy. You just pop the mask out, you put the 120 mask in instead and feed it through. However, no, you need to change the location of the rubber wheels in order to grab 120 film. So you got to make them wider. And what that entails doing is actually pushing these rubber O-rings along this axle, which I personally found really hard to do. And I'm not sure if it's because I have big hands. And just to give you an idea there for scale, I didn't have, I guess, the dexterity to really easily push those wheels along without having to take these knobs and axles out first. And I'm not sure if that's the recommended way to do it or not. But I found that was really difficult to do, and it took a fair bit of time, even compared to removing those 4 plastic wing nuts on the EFH and removing the 35mm mask in order to scan 120. This I found was a bit more troublesome. And if you've seen Roger from Shoot Film Like a Boss's review, he jokingly said that it might be worth having a separate one of these for 120. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe someone running a lab did do that, because changing between those locations on the axles, I found really hard just to slide those rubber O-rings across, and it's quite painful. So I'm not sure, again, if that's something that might be changed in the final version, but that's definitely worth mentioning and keeping in mind that it's not going to be a quick express job switching between 35mm and 120. Now, when it came to actually using the 120 system for scanning, I found that also similar to the EFH, feeding the film through from one side of the aperture to the other, the film sometimes had a tendency to get stuck at the exit. However, with the Valoi, it's a little bit more complicated, because with the 120 film, especially if there's a little bit of an upwards curl, and this is especially if you scan the emulsion side up like I recommend, the film might curl a little bit upwards, is that it can get stuck not at the entry point of the exit side, but at the exit point of the exit side, meaning, you know, this part where the film comes out, because there's a little sharp lip at the top of that aperture of that mask where I found that 120 film that I was trying to scan that only had a very slight curl got stuck at that exit point. And if this happens with the EFH, for example, it is fairly easy to just maybe stick something flat and long underneath there, poke it up to get it through the other side of the aperture. With the Valoi, I found it was a lot harder to try and poke anything around in that really narrow exit space to try and free the film up to let it feed through. So it was very difficult just getting it through that with some film, scanning emulsion side up. And I'll explain a little bit more about that soon. But also, once you have fed your 120 film through, you need to sort of make sure you guide it into that location where the wheels are in order to feed it through. So there is a little bit of extra time cost I found there if you're going to be scanning through a lot of 120 rolls, or especially strips. It's going to be quite difficult, I guess, in comparison to using the EFH. Not only that, but you'd have to scan your first frame sometimes, then feed it through enough to reach the wheels. Then you can start using the wheel feeding system to continue to scan the rest of the frames on that roll or strip. So if you can imagine doing a lot of strips, that is going to be a little bit more time consuming. So it makes me question how much convenience having an advancing system for 120 film really adds. 120 film isn't that long, so it doesn't take that long to just feed it through by hand. Some of the issue could have also been caused because of the fact that these beta masks don't sit perfectly within that space in the advancer. So what I found is that they kind of wiggle around, meaning that the alignment can sort of change, and there's a fair bit of free play of the mask with both 35mm and 120, which might have made it a little bit harder to feed the film into the rubber wheels at the advancing end of the system. But I'll touch a little bit more on that towards my final findings. Before that, one thing I'll mention also is that unlike the 35mm mask, I found that with the 120 mask, film didn't seem to sit as flat as it did with the Essential film holder. With 35mm it did, but with the 120 holder, I could even just see, you can probably see it in this B-roll here, that with 120 film, there is a noticeable little bit of sag. Again, I believe this is down to the fact that it's the beta unit that had an issue with flatness, which is probably what's also causing that free play. But let's look at some scans and see where they differ to the Essential film holder. All right, so first off, I've got 2 frames here scanned on the Essential film holder on the left and the Valoi on the right. It's a frame of 645 Kodak Ektar. And just generally looking at it overall, there's no major difference between flatness and sharpness. It's only really if you nitpick and zoom in to some of the edges, you can see a little bit more. But what I did is I chose to also scan a frame of 6.7. And because that's a larger frame of film, that little bit of sag did show up a little bit more, I think. So if we zoom into the center, again, everything's pretty even. Essential film holder on the left, Valoi on the right once again. Zooming back out, you can see same distinct patterns of having a little bit more border on the Essential film holder. But if we look at the edges of the frame, zooming into this left edge here, you can see on the Essential film holder, there's a little bit more sharpness in that van, especially if you look at the headlight. It seemed to do a little bit better of a job in the edges of the frame there. Tiny little bit more sharpness. Again, not a whole lot, and I believe that is something that hopefully would be solved in the final version of the masks. So I would be keen to try those final versions. In conclusion, what are my overall thoughts about the usage differences between the Essential film holder and the Valoi system? So first of all, the obvious thing is that with the Essential film holder, you're feeding the film by hand. With this, you're using the little wheels. I thought that having the wheels would be a big time saver and convenience. But I would say it's a minor convenience and time saver, and it's something you'll mainly just notice with 35mm scanning longer uncut rolls, where having that wheel system is a nice convenience. In terms of holding the film flat, they were both fairly equal. If anything, the 120 film was flatter in the EFH, but again, that's probably due to the fact that it was the beta masks. And on that note, trying to feed the film through the wheels, you also need to make sure that the knobs are screwed on to just the right sort of level of tightness, because when I was removing them to try and change the rubber rings, I had screwed them back on and found that the film wasn't feeding through. It was just sort of free spinning, like a broken clutch in a car. And I had to make sure I was tightening each of the screws just to the right amount. Otherwise, one wheel would work to spin the film through, the other one would or wouldn't. And I had to sort of play around with it a fair bit to get the right level of tightness to make sure that when the film was catching, it was actually feeding through. That added a little bit of frustration. Again, not sure if it's specific to the beta unit, but if you scan a lot of film, you might start to notice this stuff. The next thing that I spoke about was changing between formats. Like I said, it can be very time consuming. So with the Essential Film Holder, it's not super fast either. You have to unscrew these wing nuts. What I tend to do is just loosen them and flick them off and then remove that mask. And even that was a little bit quicker than the method I mentioned, having to go through with the Valoi of having to relocate those rubber grommets, something that I found really difficult. I would hope that maybe that could be improved in future versions of this holder. Now, another big thing I mentioned was about scanning emulsion side up, and this is worth going into a little bit because if you've seen my Essential Film Holder review, you know that I mentioned in that I definitely recommend scanning your film, whatever holder you're using, with the emulsion side up, because that's less shiny. You're going to have less issues with reflections, and in my testing, you get a sharper result scanning on the emulsion side. I've tested this with black and white, with color film, and I do find that scanning emulsion side up gives you a better overall scan and sharpness. However, what that means is that when you have the emulsion side up, because of the way it's been shot through the camera, it will leave your film wanting to curl upwards. Now, when it comes to the Essential Film Holder, it's not a big deal because once the film makes it out, it's far enough from the aperture that even if it curls back, it sort of rolls up on itself. What I found with the Valoi is that once I fed the film through with the emulsion side up, it would be a little bit tricky, number one, to feed it into those wheels. But once it is through the wheels, what would sometimes happen is it wants to curl back into the rollers and feed itself in twice, especially if your film is quite curly. So what happens is that with curly film, that can create a jam, which happened to me once because I wasn't careful, and I just had to make sure with curly film that I was trying to keep it away from feeding back in. But what then can happen is that it's rubbing up against that brushed metal surface, which I'm not sure how ideal that is for the film, but just something worth noting. So with scanning film emulsion side up, especially with 120, I found that easier to do with the Essential Film Holder. Another usage difference I noticed with the Valoi is that it has those rubber feet, which are adjustable. I wouldn't recommend using the feet to adjust. Rather, I would just say use a mirror, as I mentioned in my EFH review, and align the film holder and camera each time you scan, because that's going to make sure you get the best results each time. But it is nice having that rubber foot for extra grip on the Valoi. Another thing about the Valoi that was really cool is that it seems to have all these little options for expansions in the future. One of the things that's going to be available is a dust brush, for example, if you really want to try and minimize dust. And there's other expansion slots. Kind of reminds me of the extra slots that were on the Nintendo 64 when it came out, and the future expansion ability. That's something I mentioned to Harold and I thought was pretty cool. So who knows what's going to come out for that in the future. It could be interesting. I'm really interested to see where this product goes. I think it has a lot of potential, but there are a few little things that, because it's a more complicated product, make it a little bit of a tricky decision if I was in the market personally to decide between the Essential Film Holder and the Valoi. And now, obviously, on that note, myself having received both of these units for free to do reviews for YouTube, it's very different to you having paid, whether it's $150 or $400 for either of these. So I want to make your decision as easy as possible and to try and be as unbiased as possible, because it is different when you've gotten something for free as opposed to having paid a certain amount of money and then coming into certain issues or finding usage not as suitable for you. So generally speaking, I think if you're in the market, the Valoi is a good option if you really want that advancer, if you're willing to pay the money for that convenience, however much it might provide. And in my opinion, that convenience only really counts with uncut 35mm rolls. In my experience, scanning strips was slower because of the fact that you have to get them through the wheels each time, scan the first frame first, feed it, wheel them through, change strips. I would recommend the Essential Film Holder for most people, especially if you're wanting that little bit of extra versatility, easier switching between 120 and 35. It's a lot cheaper. It includes that diffuser, and I didn't have as many quirks with feeding uncut rolls through. But I suppose if you're scanning the same kind of film and it's always the same level of flatness. You don't have any issues with the curl that I mentioned, and you don't have too much fuss with scanning, whether it's emulsion side or not. This could be good for you if you scan a lot of 35mm and you want those wheels, must have it. But in my opinion, it didn't save me as much time as I thought it would have when I was always looking at things like this or the negative supply, thinking it would be so cool to have wheels to feed the film through. But in reality, after I've gotten so used to using the Essential Film Holder, I really think that there's not too much extra convenience, but it is there if you're willing to pay for it. So if I was personally spending the money, I would definitely recommend the Essential Film Holder if you were in my boat. I would find it harder to justify the 400-ish Australian dollars for the pre-order price because I would need to buy the diffuser as well. I would much rather personally spend the 160 on the Essential Film Holder and get that, but that's me. You might be different. You might have different plans for this and really want that convenience or some of the different features of the Valoi system. I would hope that most of those issues I mentioned would be ironed out and that they are just down to the fact that these are beta masks, especially things like that extra jiggle and free play in these, the lack of flatness in the 120 mask, and most importantly, and I'm not sure if this is a beta specific feature, but the exit point of that mask having that sharp lip, I would hope that it's changed to a rounded lip like it has on the bottom, because with this injection molded plastic, which kind of reminds me of those like model car kits, they have that sort of frayed edges. It's not ideal for your film to be rubbing up against sharp edges like that, especially when you compare it to the laser cut plastic acrylic of the EFH. I personally had a little bit of scratching, especially on that 120 roll that I was struggling with and some of my other 120 rolls, trying to feed them through the mask and then into the rollers and then curling back around. I did find that the Valoi was a little bit more prone to scratching in my situation. Maybe that's because I scan emulsion side up like a weirdo or whatever, but that's something definitely worth mentioning. And that you can kind of see in this B-roll here, there wasn't only scuffed marks on the edges of the film because of the wheels, and that doesn't really matter because it's just on the rebate, which I'm not too fussed about, but there were also some scratches and marks created on the actual film surface, especially in the beginning of the roll where I was messing around trying to feed it through. So I hope that a lot of that beta unit stuff is sorted out. And I'd be keen to hear from anyone who has a final version, watching this down the track when it's released, how much difference there really is. And if any of these issues I mentioned in this video remain to be seen in the final version, I'm not too sure, but you can let me know. So overall, I think it's great to have a new product on the market. It's not easy to do what Harold and his team at Valoi are doing and bring something completely new. Sure, it's expensive, but I guess it kind of has to be if you're bringing an entire new brand to market and integrating mechanical moving parts. There's a reason why I think this is simple and effective, and it is much cheaper. Whereas if you're having options for a lot of extra bits and pieces, you're using metal and injection molding, and there's a little bit less room for error there, this is going to cost a lot of money. If you're a small independent manufacturer, sure, things like this and negative supply cost a lot more. So I admire what they've done. I think it's great for the film community to have more competition, more products on the market, more options, because this now stands as kind of a middle point between the cheaper Essential Film Holder, for example, and the negative supply, which was always seen as the much more expensive option. But again, I would recommend the Valoi mainly for scanning 35mm, and that begs the question, would it be better just to spend about an extra, I think it's about $100 to just get the negative supply, 35mm Mark 1 or whatever it's called? I'm not sure. I've never used that one, but if I was personally in the market and I was looking at spending 430 Australian dollars for this, I know that it would only cost, I think, according to my notes, about $359 for the negative supply 35mm holder. But I am interested to see where this goes, and I would be keen to maybe try those new improved masks of the final version, and maybe to try the optional diffuser just to see how much better it makes the experience. So I guess it is a pretty tricky decision to make. I've tried to lay everything out on the table for you to make the process a little bit easier if you're in the market to buy one of these two. I've given you my opinions, my testing, my thoughts, and again, keep in mind that this was a beta version of those masks. Hopefully a lot of those things have been improved. I hope this video makes your decision a little bit easier. And if you do happen to buy either of these, I have links to either of the products. So I'll again leave the decision completely up to you. But if you happen to use my links for a limited time, I think Harold from Valoi is going to provide me with a code for a 10% discount on any of the products he sent me that you can use on the Valoi web store. So I'm not sure if that's active immediately at the time of me putting out this video, but just check the description. It might be only valid for a limited time. So if you see the link and discount code in the description, feel free to use that if you're going to pre-order the Valoi. That is my standpoint after my extensive nerdy testing. I want it to be sort of as clinical as possible. So again, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching another Pushing Film video, and I'll see you in the next one.